Animal Crossing New Horizons has truly been a blast to play. I feel like with each iteration of Animal Crossing to come out, it feels more and more connected. Being able to visit your friends' islands on a whim, or pulling together a huge group of friends to play games has never been easier. Want to play hide and seek on your island? The world is your oyster, or at least your pearless manila clam. In contrast to where Animal Crossing started from, and to where it is today, I can certainly say that the experience feels far less lonely than the original. I loved how New Horizons mirrored the original opening about starting out fresh, but there's something about going back to the original game that feels isolating. Maybe it's because the world has evolved, and we're so interconnected nowadays. The OG Animal Crossing only had local memory card support for connecting with others. Beyond that, it was a solo experience. While you were visiting someone else's town, they were gone. There was always a barrier between you and them, and thus the world felt isolated. You moved to a new town, took on a huge loan, and watched the hours roll by. But I digress. The whole isolated experience got me thinking about Animal Crossing in general. What if the first game had multiplayer? How could the original Animal Crossing have flourished even more if it wasn't a lonely one-player experience? Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it, but it makes you wonder. So today we're taking a look at the concept by introducing a second player to the game. Things are probably going to break, but I'm super curious to see how it feels. So I hope you're ready for a bunch of broken game mechanics and all the weird things I'm going to try as we start the game with 2 players. Now, the things you're going to see in this video are basically only possible due to the help of KirbyMimi. If you watched my video about Luigi's Mansion Scrap multiplayer, you'll be familiar with the concept that Luigi's Mansion originally had a split screen mode that was still in the code. That is not the same thing as this video. What you're seeing here is a prototype of loading in a second player, tying their actions to a second controller, and generating a second camera. They are capable of walking around, advancing to other areas of the map, and basically most of the functions that player 1 can do. This was KirbyMimi's concept, and I'm merely taking it for a test run, so a huge thanks to them for helping out. But before getting to town and taking it for a spin, let's actually swap back to the beginning of the game. With this multiplayer functionality loaded, the title screen breaks a bit since it creates 2 characters and offers 2 cameras. Due to the player normally not being able to occupy the space another player takes, it's very easy for player 2 to fall off track and get stuck walking against something. This was kinda neat, but what I was most interested in was spotting 2 players into areas where we normally don't even see our player, like for example, the loading screen or the new game screen. So let's check it out. When you load these areas with 2 players, you quickly realize that player 1 has always been here, but they are just invisible. The second player loads in just fine, and they are free to walk around while player 1 is talking. What's interesting is that the second player will always look like this on this particular map. This character combination is always here every single time. It's kinda neat to explore this dark void where KK Slider is sitting. It's definitely a room and has walls on all sides. Where the first player is standing can't be stood on because the player is still there. If they weren't invisible, they would look just like us. We're free to phase through KK Slider on our second player, but the unfortunate part is the game softlocks as we start the train sequence. This is probably due to the camera movement that happens at the end of the cutscene. Since we have 2 cameras and have an abnormal setup, the game's sequences of events get frozen and it never fades to black. To remedy this, we'll go back through the opening of the game again, but this time we'll spawn the second player while the second map is loading. If done correctly, we'll appear on the train with player 2 intact. Now, the train is another area in the game where our player's model never loads. It's from a first-person perspective as Rover approaches us to talk. If we could see our character, they would look just like this. Regardless of how we name our character, or state if we are a boy or girl, our model will stay the same until the next map loads. We are free to move around the train with player 2 as player 1 continues to distract Rover. The entire train has collision for the most part, except for a few things. Our character clips to the sides a bit, and they are capable of walking through the back door to the area where Rover makes his phone call. The foreground of the train is just a black void without much to do. As we linger on in the conversation, eventually Rover gets up to make his call to Tom Nook and walks to the back of the train. We can creep on his phone call by going through the back door with him and just chilling nearby. Eventually, this all ends though and the train pulls up. We're now ready to enter town. So one of the things I was eager to try with 2 people was to see if I could skip the Tom Nook intro sequence. Since player 1 currently is the only character that NPCs respond to, I was hoping we could bypass Tom Nook's interruption once we got off the train. But the problem is that despite our second player being able to move past the event trigger, they basically can't enter any buildings without the help of player 1 in this current state. I was hoping that we could potentially be a freeloader in the town without any proper introductions or a house to our name. trying to escape the train station platform where player 1 is possible, and we are free to explore anywhere we want on the north side of the tracks. But Tom Nook is a persistent bugger. Tom Nook's interruption trigger actually spans the infinite range of the map horizontally. So regardless of where you are at, if you try to move past where the bottom of the staircase would be in terms of the map coordinates, you'll turn and face Tom Nook as he calls out to you. You could even be out in the void, way out of bounds, and this still would be the case. The game softlocks at this point because Tom Nook is programmed to walk up to you. But with our character several grid spaces over, Nook can never reach us. He gets hung up due to the grid system the map uses, and he'll forever waddle in place as we wait for him. So getting to town is a no-go. Trying to reset the game or access a map loader at this point, at least for me, just restarted the train sequence all over again. I imagine this is because we haven't actually saved out our town data yet, so everything is still in limbo. However, if I couldn't break the sequence at this point, perhaps I could do it while Tom was showing us the houses. So I proceed with the dialogue until we can move again, and then started trying to break out Tom Nook's death grip. At this point in the game, the developers decided to fit the outskirts of this particular grid square you are on with a text bubble that prevents you from leaving. This is triggered anytime a character moves over it. This seemed like the end of the line, but then I realized that maybe there was a way out. Player 2 has the ability to push player 1, and since Tom Nook's text bubble only occurs when player 1 is moving, that means player 2 can push player 1 over the trigger area without activating it. By doing this, we can free player 1 from the prison we are in, but the struggle isn't over yet. Tom Nook's booming voice can reach us anywhere in the world, and the rules of this grid apply to every grid, regardless of where you are at. So you'll need to push the player out of every map square into the next to expand. But despite being free, something is terribly wrong. The entire world is unloaded. Where houses should be, they are not. Fruit trees are still present, but the world is empty. And in order to fix this, we actually need to reload. So the problem is that player 1's movement is what triggers objects to load in the world. If they aren't moving when loading a new area, nothing loads. So in order to attempt to escape this purgatory, we need to try a few things. So let's rewind. We're now back with Tom Nook looking at houses. I do want to transition here just for a few seconds to talk about how loading any new maps are sort of glitched. The game is expecting us to load any of the 4 houses, and those are the only maps it wants us to load. Despite this, the game is already starting to show its cracks a bit. Anytime we go into a new map, like the inside of a house, or coming out of one, the train arrival jingle plays. There's a part of the sequence that is broken, and what I was attempting to do earlier was break this loop. Since the game expects us to go into a house, I want to go into another building interior it isn't expecting, but our options are severely limited due to how the game loads places. However, row A on the map always contains at least 2 mandatory buildings. So the trick at this point is to break out of bounds as soon as we get off the train and hope that one of the adjacent square maps next to the train station contain the post office or Tom Nook's shop. If we get an unlucky spawn, we're doomed. We need them to be close, otherwise they'll unload. We basically need to walk along the train tracks and into the square so they load in without triggering Tom Nook coming for us. Once they are loaded, we can plant player 2 next to them for safekeeping as we then go back to the train station and start Tom Nook's dialogue. He'll take us to the houses, and then we position ourselves at the edge of the grid. Since we previously loaded this area and didn't move far, it will still be loaded, which allows player 2 to come over and push player 1 past the grid. Once this is done, player 1 is free to go into Tom Nook's shop. My clock just happened to be set for March 31st, 2020, so the inside of the shop was raffle day. Tom Nook proceeded to chat with me as if I was showing up for work, and he wouldn't let me bid on anything. So I decided to talk to him, and, well, the game went straight to the title screen. I feel like it had no idea what it was supposed to do in this situation, so it straight up went nope and kicked me out the front door. Since we can't save our game until after we finish Tom Nook's errands, we are basically screwed. But fear not! There is one last question to answer, and we're going back into the shop. If we can't talk to Nook, perhaps leaving the shop will cause the game to try to load the normal map. So that's what I did. I stepped outside and onto the train as it arrived back in town. Despite my best efforts, the game was not going to let me leave. This was my nightmare, and it wasn't time to wake up yet. So yeah, the game definitely runs into some issues if we try to break it with 2 players, which is obviously expected. However, if we proceed as normal, we will eventually get to a section of the game where we are free to do as we please, without many bugs occurring. Having 2 players being able to run around, utilize tools, and ultimately work together to pay off your house loan is pretty interesting though. By this methodology, it's almost like they are a roommate. I mean, in the real world, lots of people aren't able to actually afford a house strictly by themselves. People split rentals too. So this is pretty appropriate given that you start with absolutely nothing but 1,000 bells to your name. So whether the second player was someone splitting the mortgage with you, or if they were a neighbor across the way, navigating this world of Animal Crossing with more than 1 player kind of brought a little more life to this game. It's like what KK Slider told us at the beginning of the game. Having friends makes things feel a lot less lonely. Sure, we broke a lot of stuff in the game, but that's what friends do, right? Ultimately, I think I would have really enjoyed 2 players on the GameCube version, since my brothers and I would have been able to combine our long play sessions instead of waiting for someone to get off the console. In a time-sensitive game like Animal Crossing, that would have made a huge difference. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this broken adventure. Go to the comments right now and let me know how 2 players would have changed your experience years ago. Or perhaps what you have tried to break with the setup I just tackled. Once again, a huge thanks to KirbyMimi for helping out with this. And with that, thanks for watching, guys and gals. Subscribe now if you haven't already, and until my next video, cheers.